Former police dog barks at tree continuously, raising suspicions among investigators. Born as an ex-police dog, this pup Kyle had his mind imprinted with loyalty, even as a pup. Kyle is a now old German Shepherd who relieved of work as a police dog and was now living his last days in the beautiful countryside with a great view and in the loving care of a couple who fell in love with him at first sight. It is obvious that the dog, with how active he still is, misses his many years as a police dog. Most of all, the human partner he had spent years was raking with, who he had developed a deep bond with. Kyle has spent most of his life as John's cop partner, helping the police force solve countless cases of murder and finding missing people. Would it ever be possible for Kyle to go back to his glory days? Being born for a particular purpose, Kyle already had his entire destiny set in stone. He had no knowledge of it when he was born. He did, however, find out his path in life later. Kyle was trained before he could enter the service. It wasn't easy because he was young and wayward. Kyle would be very good-natured in attacking and searching for explosives, but it soon turned out that he was smart and obedient. He quickly assimilated new knowledge and skills. Kyle had everything necessary for successful service in the police, namely interest and intelligence. However, Kyle had trouble being truly aggressive towards people. He was a sweet dog at heart and would be able to live as one whenever he left the life of a police dog. Kyle had hidden fears and insecurities when he joined the police full-time. It seemed like fear of the undiscovered, fear of not being strong sufficient to protect others, and fear of not being capable. And his fears were quickly forgotten. He'd been paired up with John, who he immediately felt a companionship with, one that grew into a bond. Many people talk about love when it comes to the relationship between a dog and a person, but what we often don't know is about the connection that forms between a dog and a person. The connection formed between these two is never easily broken. It is usually a norm for police dogs to work with as many officers in the force as possible, but it became noted that Kyle was only ever in his true form when he was paired up with John. So it was decided that it was better they were left together as they were great partners. Police dogs usually live in police families. This is necessary in order for the dog to feel belonging, need, and love. Kyle was placed randomly in the family. At first, it was unusual for him that he was not taught hugs and kisses, but he eventually got them too. It was a perfect match. Kyle felt like the only favorite in the family because he was well taken care of. But one day, the couple found out that soon they would have a baby. The changes were inevitable. Some parents do not want dogs to be near babies because of the possible aggression of dogs. The couple did not want to risk the baby's health. Despite the fact that they loved Kyle very much, the couple decided to give him away. They asked the police to find a new home for the dog. John, of course, on the one hand, was upset by the news, and on the other, he was happy with his decision to keep Kyle. John instantly made the decision to take Kyle to him. On the same day, John brought the dog to his apartment. It was a small and suited bachelor life. John had an only wife, and it was a job. It was enough space for Kyle and John, who immediately started to live like roommates who did everything together. The life of a police dog is a constant training and consolidation of skills for the protection and capture of criminals. Kyle was an experienced dog and a true professional. John and Kyle achieved good results all the time, so they had a good reputation. They did not sit without work. But it wasn't always easy for Kyle to solve crimes. One day, he was given the task to find out the location of the missing girl. She disappeared 2 days earlier. Kyle experienced real difficulties for the first time, but he saw her parents crushed by grief and really wanted to help them. Kyle put all his skills and talent into practice. He carefully sniffed the baby's clothes and signaled readiness. The police squad, along with Kyle, began to search for the girl. Time has passed. Kyle hadn't stopped for miles. It began to seem that the search would not lead to success. The police trusted Kyle and began to search the place that Kills pointed out. However, the parents did not have to explain anything. They said that this place was the home of the girl's aunt. Soon the girl was found in this house. It turned out that the child ran away during parents' quarrel. On a task when the pair were confronted by armed men, Kyle had used his quick instincts to shove John out of the path of a shot, and luckily for them both, the bullet missed them. But the harsh conditions began to affect Kyle's well-being. Kyle worked hard and strenuously for the police. He was a successful lifeguard and an unsurpassed defender. When Kyle turned 8, he retired. In gratitude for his good deeds and hard work, he was allowed to live a quiet old age. Of course, John knew that sooner or later this would happen, but time passed too quickly. They spent 8 happy years together. John will always be grateful to the dog for saving his life and will always remember how he apprehended a gang of armed criminals. They had a lot of memories together. Parting was very sad and unbearably painful, but John knew how important it was for Kyle. John decided to give Kyle an unforgettable summer holiday for the last time and organized a party for him outdoors. Kyle was given to a family of nice people whose children have already grown up and decided to move out of the house. The couple immediately fell in love with the dog. It was impossible not to love Kyle. He was very sweet, kind, and smart. The Smith family pampered him and scratched his belly and behind his ears at every opportunity. However, there was not enough space in the house for dynamic games, which Kyle really needed. Kyle never forgot about John, but he was happy in the Smith family. A year later, the couple's son moved out of the house, so the house was not so crowded. In fact, they no longer needed to stay in the city, so the family began to look for new housing. The Smiths always took their pet Kyle to inspect the houses. They trusted his intuition a lot. It was important to them that not only they liked the house, but also Kyle. For them, he became a real member of the family with his own right to vote and opinion. After a while, the Smiths found an old, spacious house away from the urban environment, which they really liked. Kyle made the final decision. He liked the house because of its size. Now Kyle could run and jump as much as he wanted. In addition, the house is surrounded by picturesque landscapes that you can admire endlessly. Their house was located in green hills and valleys near the ocean. Kyle loves running with the Smiths more than anything. His joy from this activity is so great that he motivated Thomas to sport. On joint runs, Kyle studied the terrain and new paths. But a minute later, a strange event happened. Kyle seemed to have lost his previous interest in walking. He walked slowly beside Thomas, who had barely been able to catch up to him before, and the strangest part was that he didn't seem to want to explore anymore. Thomas tried to ignore the changes in Kyle's behavior until the last moment, but the dog was losing energy every day. Kyle stopped coming to the food. Then Thomas thought that maybe it was a mistake to move to the country and Kyle could miss the city, but most of all, Thomas was worried that Kyle was sick. Thomas took Kyle to the vet for a checkup. The veterinarian did a lot of research to understand what the dog's health problems were. However, it turned out that Kyle was not ill and was in good shape. But one day, an extraordinary thing happened on a walk. Suddenly, Kyle turned from a quiet domestic dog into a working police dog. Rage welled up in him. Kyle stopped and became alert, and then he buried his nose in the ground and began to look for something. He was so engrossed in the process that he didn't notice Thomas. Now Kyle was sniffing the territories every walk. He was obsessed with it. Finally, Thomas saw Kyle as a cheerful and energetic dog again. One day, he went into the depths of the forest. This time, the mission was not as simple as the previous ones. He felt an unusual smell, but could not find its source. Because of the unsolved mystery, Kyle became more restless every day. Something had to be done about it. He was dying of impatience to find the source of the smell. Thomas had to lure Kyle back with his favorite treats. Kyle absolutely refused to obey. Thomas was out of options. He didn't know what the next step was, so he contacted with Kyle's old partner, John. Seeing as they had worked together for so many years, perhaps he had already seen Kyle's behavior before and would have known what to do to get Kyle moving again. John was worried when he saw the call from Thomas. He thought Kyle was sick or even dead. What he heard was a relief. He explained to Thomas that Kyle behaved like this every time he conducted an investigation, and if he found something, he sat down next to the place of discovery and did not move from his place. When Thomas was in the same place in the forest, he went to the tree. On the one side, the tree looked normal, but on the other side it turned out to be sunken and broken. It looked unnatural, as if someone had done it to the tree on purpose. It's incredible, but there were remains in the village. Thomas couldn't name exactly which ones, but they were definitely there. Thomas no longer doubted that he was at the crime scene that Kyle had discovered. He was terrified, and Thomas decided to stay away from this tree. It was necessary to call the police urgently. Thomas shivered. He took out his phone and, without a shadow of a doubt, immediately called John. He couldn't speak properly from excitement, but he was still able to tell what he found in that tree. Thomas asked me to come and help immediately. Of course, John immediately called the criminologists and went with them to the crime scene. When John and the forensic team arrived at the scene, Kyle was jumping with happiness and couldn't stop licking John. Their separation was too long, and the meeting was very welcome. The dog was delighted. Thomas noticed that he had never seen Kyle so happy and cheerful before. It wasn't surprising because John and Kyle had a special bond. They were best friends. But it was needed to start working immediately. Kyle knew that too. They both wanted to solve the crime as soon as possible. There was a skeleton in the tree. It was necessary to find out who it belonged to. John went to the tree and began to peel off the bark, and what he saw, no one could have guessed. John was so shocked by the find that he decided to immediately call his boss and tell him everything. He took his phone out of his pocket and started calling. But suddenly, fellow criminologists asked John to stop and not do it. Just one glance from them was enough to figure out who the skeleton belonged to. It usually takes at least a week to determine who the bones belong to, but not in this case. It took a few seconds here. The fact is that the bones were plastic, not real. It was someone's incredible Halloween prank. It would be funny if it didn't cause so much horror and fear. It was the work of an experienced scarecrow. John was glad that it turned out to be a false alarm, but on the other hand, he was worried about Kyle. So many years of impeccable service, and suddenly his partner confused an artificial skeleton with real bones. Maybe he did it on purpose so that John would come to him. John looked at his friend, who was still happy to meet him, and jumped with delight. At that moment, John understood everything completely. Of course, it wasn't the skeleton. John couldn't help but laugh. It was a clever plan to lure John to visit. John looked into Kyle's eyes and saw confirmation of his speculation. Kyle looked lovingly at his former partner and snuggled up to him. Kyle was such a smart dog that he thought of everything in advance. He knew that if he played the investigation, John would definitely come to him. When he moved to the village, he realized that there was no better place for this performance to be found. John was very touched by Kyle's dedication. They went for a long walk together, and while they were walking, John and Kyle seemed to have been in the past. Before leaving, John promised Kyle to visit him often. John has not broken his promise since then.